Greetings. Welcome to Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is the 16th Sunday after Pentecost. So I go away for 1 week and someone slips in 2 awful readings. But Billy Collins, I'm happy to say, is the saving grace. That Psalm 137 has a very iconic beginning, but a horrific ending. And Luke's gospel story has Jesus, who, remember, is talking to slaves and horrendously poor peasants who are de facto slaves. And in his parable, he's using them as fodder. So I'm going to slip the noose with these readings and sneak into territory that they imply, even if not directly. But first, that haunting cry. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Now that's the cry, the lament for what has been lost, and a grief transformed into bitter, violent resentment, as we can see at the end of that psalm. It's a lament of the exiled, those who look back to what was and should have been and land themselves in a pool of nostalgic vengeance. We hear the same thing today in our own world, rising up from the rubble of lost manufacturing jobs, union members who remember how it used to be before they were exiled into a gig economy. And we hear it today among Christian churchgoers who are used to be a majority with bulging congregations and have been exiled into a secular culture in which one religion seems much like the other and none of them quite seem to fit with modernity. We hear it today among liberal arts academics that used to carpet the floors and the walls of the academy before their forced march into a STEM wilderness where big incomes for engineers and programmers replaced pure knowledge for its own sake. We hear it today from the fear-festering pockets of white America calling for or demanding a return to, quote, normalcy when power and privilege never had to be thought about because they were assumed. And a multicultural, multiracial nation sounds to them like exile. Whoever or whatever brought us to the places we don't want to be, dash those little ones on the rocks, as that psalm ends. Nostalgia soon morphs into resentment, leading into bitterness, arriving at vengeance. But authentic faith, the little mustard seed kind, is a bulwark against nostalgia for the way things used to be, and anger that arises when brittle beliefs crumble like autumn leaves. Faith, as we know, has nothing to do with beliefs. Beliefs are things that pad our minds with the hopes that they will protect us. And faith is something else altogether. Now, in that wacky and weird parable Luke has Jesus tell, there is a similar kind of bitterness beneath the apostles' plea for Jesus to increase their faith. They want more. They want protection. And when they don't get it, when faith turns out to be something very much different, they will be bitter and they will wander away. Crushed by grief, endangered by human trauma and tragedy, raked across loss as all of us have been or will be. How can we have faith? How can our faith survive the ordinary ravages of an ordinary life? This is the question that is posed by Psalm 137, Luke's funky little parable. Well, maybe it's the question posed, and maybe it's just my take on them, but either way, this is where we've landed today. So this question, these questions, this concern, this focus on faith takes us back to bedrock, to the place where we can't dig any deeper. So let's revisit that. We start with the ancient Hebrew word. You'll remember it because I come back to it often. Emunah. Emunah. It means a fierce and a ferocious holding on to. Emunah was a word they used to describe the experience, not the idea of faith. You see, faith was not an intellectual set of beliefs or doctrines for our ancestors. It was emunah, a holding on to God. It indicated a fierce and ferocious grasp on the experience of God. Emunah, holding on to God and not letting go. And of course, holding on to and letting go are choices. Faith is a choice. More about that in a minute. Billy Collins, in that wonderful poem on Turning 10, helps to describe that wonderful yet melancholy border between childhood and the next phase. It's the phase in which we choose faith or not. Because before that phase, we don't have to choose. In post-childhood, we have to choose to hold on to a power greater than ourselves and a life that is bigger and more ferocious than any single belief you've ever had. Do you remember? I bet you do. Do you remember the last scene from the original Winnie the Pooh? In it, Christopher Robin leaves the 100-acre wood for the last time. The 100-acre wood is a metaphor for childhood. And reading it as an adult to a child, we know that he's never coming back. The child we're reading it to doesn't know it yet. But we know that Christopher Robin is never coming back. At turning 10, that first big number, when we discover that we bleed and that mom and dad can't always fix it, and by extension that mom and dad cannot always protect us, suddenly the world seems a lot more dangerous. On the day that we turn 10, metaphorically, or the day that we leave the 100-acre wood, or on the day that our parent dies and we're still a child, or on the day that the magic light drains out of our bicycle for the last time and we bleed, is the day that we arrive at the border of emunah. That's the day when you and I have to decide for the first time to choose God or retreat into our nest of beliefs. It's the day that we know for the first time that it's a choice. Now please don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about believing in God, as in all the things that we're ever told about God in Sunday school or from the nuns or the preacher. I'm talking about choosing God, choosing to hold on to our experience of God, no matter how small or grand. Because you see, young children don't have any difficulty believing that Muhammad moved the mountains, or that Jesus walks on water, or that God protects us from disaster. We do not have to work to believe such things because there's magic everywhere when we're small. The world is a magical place before we arrive at that border. But at that border and beyond, emunah, holding on to God, is that tiny mustard seed of faith that Jesus tells us is so powerful. Excuse me. Holding on to God no matter what, no matter how painful the loss, no matter how depressing the outcome seems, no matter how bleak the options appear, no matter how confusing the events that shake out, holding on to, no matter what. You see, faith is not a thing that protects us. That if we have it, we'll be safe, or we'll be rewarded, or we'll be protected. It's a thing we hold on to no matter what or not. Faith is rooted in our experience or experiences of the holy. It doesn't come from what somebody else tells us about God or the Bible stories about God. That's where beliefs come from. Our beliefs are those 10,000 images of how we want life to be that cover the walls of the cave or the hut or the house we live in. Beliefs come from other people, or they're made up in our own minds, and they help us to make sense out of a world that probably really does not make sense. And beliefs help us to feel bigger in a universe in which we are so small as to be insignificant. But when we have faith, the kind the ancient Hebrews meant when they used the word emunah, we know that our beliefs are just beliefs. We know it, and though it's a little scary, we can still live forward because we're holding on to God. Faith is holding on to God even when the pages of our beliefs flutter by and we no longer know what to believe. Not knowing what to believe is okay because we're holding on to God. You see, most of our religious mistakes, or our spiritual mistakes, however you want to phrase it, come from the fact that we live in an economic culture in which everything of value is transactional. In our culture, we ask everything, what good is it? What can I get for it? How much is it worth? What will you give me for it? Which is what we also ask of faith most of the time. But faith has no answer for transactional questions. Faith does not buy us anything. Faith does not protect us from anything. Faith does not have any value beyond itself. Faith is simply the ability and choice to hold on to our experiences of the holy, regardless of how far they recede in the rearview mirror. Can we step into any hurricane that surrounds us and know deep in our bones that no matter what happens, it's okay? Not even that we'll survive, but because of God, because God is good and we're part of God, we are and we will be okay. I think that's what it means to hold on to faith, or to have a faith that holds on to God. Now, no theology professor or spiritual director ever told me that, but it seems to me that mustard seed faith is about that kind of holding on to God while letting go of beliefs as our foundation. Now, I know we have to have beliefs. It's part of the life of the mind, and human beings were given beautiful minds. But beliefs are not faith. And most of our beliefs will dissolve in a storm. But an experience of God, even a small experience of the holy, or a quiet moment with God, or a big and dramatic one, any size really, is enough to hold on to for a lifetime. Emunah. Hold on to it. Hey, thank you so much for being here, and peace be with you.